And then his adversary in this film is Llewellyn Moss, played really well by Josh Brolin, a.k.a. Thanos. Llewellyn's a hunter and also a killer, too, you can assume, because
it looks like he's killed people in Vietnam.
Yeah, so he's a Vietnam War vet, and Llewellyn, like Anton, is a very capable person. He can handle himself, but he's going up, just like Sheriff Ed Tom, an actual monster that he still, till the end of the movie, to his death, never truly understands. He never truly gets what Anton Chigurh is, despite Carson Wells trying to explain it to him. And
I think so. To add on that real quick, I think that Llewellyn, he thinks that Anton Chigurh is motivated by money, but what he doesn't understand is that Chigurh is motivated by his duty more than anything.
His principles.
Yeah.
And Carson tries to explain that to him, but it's Carson, even though he thinks he understands Anton, he still doesn't understand Anton fully either. And Llewellyn, the main difference between him and Anton is obviously humanity, and Llewellyn has emotions, and his biggest weakness going up against his maniac Anton Chigurh is his empathy and his compassion. When he goes back, he gets that money, he gets the satchel, and he goes back to bring the water to the Mexican gangster inside that car. That's the biggest mistake he ever made, because you can assume, or you can imagine, that if he never brought that water back, they would have never found out that it was him with the truck and chased him down, and he wouldn't be in that mess.
Yeah, he would have gotten away with it.
You can think, but also I think that either way, Anton Chigurh was going to find him.
Yeah, because he had the tracker, so maybe he would have tracked him down eventually.
Even without the tracker, for me, again, the Terminator, Anton Chigurh would stop at nothing. He'd spend his entire life. Wouldn't even care. Spend his entire life finding the money and finding the person, just out of principle.
He hints at that because when they're talking on the phone after the shootout, he tells Anton that Carla Jean won't be in Odessa, and then Anton says it doesn't matter where she is, which means he's like, it doesn't matter how far she goes or how long it takes, I'm going to find her. So he probably would have eventually found them.
So I think, even without the transponder, he would have found a way to find them. That's the most interesting part of that character. And also, besides the empathy being the biggest mistake he ever made, it's his pride and arrogance too, which are also human emotions, human weaknesses, because those lead to him and his wife's eventual deaths. Because when you think about it, Anton Chigurh's weaknesses, he doesn't really have any weaknesses, if maybe a few, but he's a very effective killer, very clever, he ties up loose ends, does introduce himself to killing situations when he doesn't always have to, but again, he uses it to tie up loose ends, ensuring that he stays a ghost. That's why Carson Wells explains that he's a ghost, and if you've seen him alive, you're a very lucky person, because there's a 50-50 shot you should be dead.
And I really love the first act of this film, because our first sequence with Llewellyn is when he is first hunting in the desert, and then he stumbles upon the drug cartels, cars, and dead bodies. And I think it's a brilliant scene, because the whole sequence is he stumbles upon the cars, and then he tracks down very intelligently where the last man standing would have gone, and then he ends up finding the money. And
to even think that there's a last man with money is smart. It's very
clever. I wouldn't
clever.
have thought of that, and it showed his intelligence, but also the way the Coens depict it is there's no exposition. He just mutters a few words kind of to himself, but otherwise they're showing us everything. They're not telling us everything, and it's just a brilliant sequence, just like the opening of There Will Be Blood, where they're showing this amazing 10 minutes of film where there's something very important is happening, but they're not spoon-feeding us the information. We're kind of learning everything as Llewellyn is learning it, and he's even a step ahead of us, because like we said, if I stumbled upon those cars, I just would have left and called the police or something. But he's smart enough to know, I think street smart enough to know that if there was a shootout, someone survived because the money's gone. So there
all the drugs are here.
Yeah, but all the drugs are here, so the money must be somewhere. So I'm going to find out where the money is. So he ultimately is the protagonist of this film, but only someone who has like an ambiguous kind of morality would even think of trying to find the money and take it from that person.
Yeah, because obviously he was going to probably have to kill somebody if he wanted to keep the money. And Llewellyn, he does seem like a good man, one who simply just takes this shot. And again, we're talking about chance versus fate here. He's clearly lived in poverty his entire life, living in trailer parks. Vietnam vets were treated like trash when they came home, so you can assume he's probably unemployed, maybe living on disability, part-time work. His wife, Carla Jean, has lived a similar life of poverty. She works at Walmart. They've never had any money. She's also the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower in Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows, FYI.
And she's in Trainspotting.
Yeah, for sure. And which is why Llewellyn takes that chance of looking for the money and then taking the money and running with it. And it's ironic how easy it was to get the money compared to how hard it was to keep the money. But again, Llewellyn's intentions were inevitably going to be sinful anyways to get the money.
Yeah, exactly. And this movie was Josh Brolin's big breakout role. He had been acting in Hollywood for a couple of decades with very little success. I think up to this point, his most prominent role was in Goonies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was a kid back then. He was like 19. And so he had just been in these random small roles. He was an American Gangster as a supporting character, but that came out the same year as this. So 2007 was obviously a big year for Josh Brolin. And before this film, he actually was working on Grindhouse, the Robert Rodriguez film that was a double feature with Death Proof with Tarantino. And he was in Robert Rodriguez's film, and he got the opportunity to send in an audition tape to the Coen brothers while he was making that film. And he asked Robert Rodriguez if he could borrow a video camera in order to film his audition because he didn't have one. Because this is 2006 or 2005 when they made that movie, so not everyone had video cameras back then. Kids, now that anyone listening to this. And so he actually, after telling this to Robert Rodriguez and asking him for help, both Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino helped film Josh Brolin's audition tape for this movie, and they shot it using the actual film cinema cameras they were using for their films, and Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino lit the scene. And so when Josh Brolin sent his audition tape to the Coen brothers, they're like, wow, the lighting looks amazing. Who shot this?
I love that story.
So I think that might have helped him get the role.
And another prominent character in this film is Carson Wells, played by the great Woody Harrelson, and one of my favorite roles he's ever done. He's really like funny and charming and quick-witted in this character of Carson Wells, who's basically a modern-day outlaw / bounty hunter. And again, he thinks he understands Anton, but he really doesn't. And I think all the people who are victim to Anton, their weaknesses are human emotion.
Exactly, and I think the best example of how he doesn't understand Anton, because he thinks he does, but you're absolutely right, because he's killed by Anton in the same hotel where the night before Anton killed the clerk. And I think Carson stayed in that hotel because he thought there's no way Anton would go back to the hotel where he killed someone the day before because it's still a crime scene. And so that was his big mistake, thinking that he understood that, whereas he still didn't understand just how crazy Anton was to be actually stroll back into the crime scene of his own murder.
And that's actually hinted at later on when Tommy Lee's talking to that other sheriff, and the sheriff's talking about how he went back to his own crime scene. He's like, what kind of crazy person would go back to their own crime scene?
Yeah, at the end of the film.
So, again, that's a really good point. And Carson, when he dies from Anton's gun, he tells him he knows where the money is. But again, he still truly doesn't understand this person. Anton doesn't give a crap about the money. He's more worried, and he cares more about killing the people who, like Carson says, inconvenienced him.
Yeah, like Carson's in the way. You know what I mean? Anyone who's in his way or like inconveniences him needs to be killed because that's part of his code. And like, yeah, Carson still doesn't understand because he's trying to buy his way out of the situation. And you can just see the humor that Anton is experiencing, just listening to Carson beg for his life the same way everyone else does.
And I think that Carson, he has all this arrogance and pride because he's probably one of the only people alive that's ever seen Anton Chigurh and lived. And so I think he probably thinks he's like on the same level as Anton Chigurh, almost. Yeah. Obviously, he calls him and compares him to the bubonic plague and everything. Yeah. But I think he thinks that because he's lived through Anton Chigurh, and I love how we don't find out how they know each other.
Yeah, I think just they've both been working for this employer for a long time.
Yeah,
because there are very subtle hints to what the employer does and who they are, because they have the business located in that building, and then Carson, when he first goes into the office, he mentions that there's a floor missing in the elevator, and this is hinted at. A lot of people think that architects often will not build the 13th floor out of luck, like a superstitious kind of thing, of bad luck being number 13. But really, in the novel, Cormac McCarthy tells you that the 17th floor is actually the one that's missing on the elevator. And the reason for that is because the 17th floor is where all the drug ring business is done, which is why it's not accessible through the elevator. This is obviously a very big drug scheme with someone who's very powerful and wealthy, who has been employing people like Anton and Carson to deal with situations like this. And so I think obviously they have not a work history, but since they've been employed by the same person for a while, they know each other and they've interacted in situations together.
Yeah, it's actually really cool to see like the corporate aspect to these giant money running schemes, which I'm sure is super accurate to the real world situations of these giant gangs and corporate drug dealers.
I agree. And I think my favorite example of Anton portraying his lack of humanity and understanding of people is that last scene with Carla Jean when she says, "You don't have to do this," and then he kind of cracks up to himself and he says, "You people always say the same thing," and she's like, "What do they say?" And he says, "They say you don't have to do this," and he's like ridiculing people because they don't want to die, and it really shows how disconnected he is from humanity, how he has absolutely no empathy for anyone else on the planet.
And you can kind of, I like the end of the film too because Anton is driving very like professionally and safe,
Perfectly, yeah.
And he's going through that green light and he gets T-boned by that car. And in a way, every time I watch that scene where he gets destroyed by the car accident, he's got a fucking bone sticking out of his arm. For me, it's kind of like the universe is trying to stop him because of his moral evil. Like it's trying to death's trying to come for him almost because he's escaping it and he's taking so much life that the universe is trying to find a way to kill him, but even the universe can't stop Anton Chigurh. Even fate can't stop him.
I would say that's a good point. I think it's just he is becoming victim of fate and becoming a victim of chance. And so just like the people he offers their lives up be under the power of chance, he also became a victim of chance in that situation. I think the reason why this movie works so well is because they avoided a lot of the cliches and the expectations that you would have with watching a film like this. For example, there's no big shootout at the end. There's no good guy against the bad guy. There's no big gunfight. And a lot of things are ambiguous, and a lot of things are, you can say, anticlimactic in a lot of ways, especially Llewellyn Moss's death near the end of the film, where we don't see his death. Ed Tom is driving up to the motel to talk with Llewellyn, and then he sees a few cartel guys escape the area and drive off, and when he goes into the hotel, he finds Llewellyn's dead body lying on the floor, and he obviously died in a shootout with the Mexicans, and we didn't see it happen. I mean, can you imagine any other movie not showing the death of the lead character in a situation and just showing their dead body instead? I think their portrayal of the story that we've seen so many times involving violence and gunfights and assassins and people trying to get away with stealing money, I think it was so brilliant to see it portrayed in this new way by not showing things like that.
Thank you for watching Raiders of the Lost podcast. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Listen to the audio format of Raiders of the Lost podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every Monday and Thursday. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/Raiders of the Lost podcast.